I came home because the farm wouldn't stay quiet. Even after my father's funeral, after the lawyer handed me the keys, I could still hear the fields breathing over the phone line whenever anyone from Marlowe County called. It was a low rhythm, steady as a heartbeat. I told myself it was just bad reception. But the signal always carried that sigh, as if the valley itself exhaled when it heard my name. The Cooper farm had stood empty 3 seasons. The white-painted house sagged to one side. Wind had peeled the letters off our mailbox so that only COOP remained, like the word cooperate had given up halfway through. Beyond the house stretched 300 acres of grain, pale and dusty, still growing, though no one had planted a seed since Dad fell ill. Neighbors told me they'd stopped trying to mow the hedgerows. Every time they cut them, new shoots broke through overnight. "It's self-fertile ground," old Tom said when I asked. He looked away toward the horizon, jaw twitching like he'd said too much. "Best not think on it." The first night back smelled of mildew, split corn, and rain that never came. I walked through each room, touching the furniture. Dad's chair by the window, Mom's long dead ivy still clinging to its pot, her apron still hanging behind the pantry door, stiff with time. It had been 20 years since she went visiting and never came back. I always thought she'd just left us. Out here, people do. By dusk, the wind began to stir, rubbing itself against the walls in long strokes. The fields outside bent as one, heads swaying eastward, like a congregation in silent prayer. That's when I heard it, something between a sigh and a word. Not quite Sam, not quite sand, just the start of my name, carried on the gust. I slept with the light on. Morning felt stranger than night. Sunlight slanted red through the kitchen blinds as if filtered by clay. The air tasted metallic. At breakfast, I opened Dad's ledger, the one I'd found in his desk the night before, and tried to make sense of his cramped, half-print handwriting. He'd started keeping notes back in 1974, rows of weather data and numbers that looked like crop yields. But at the end of every autumn entry, there was a single word, offering, and beside it always, a name. The earliest name was my great-grandfather's brother. Then, as years passed, the names drifted outward, neighbors, hired hands, women from the church. In 1998, one word in his penstroke that nearly split the page, Margaret, my mother. I laughed then, a dry, nervous sound. People go missing on farms every year. Ditches, storms, tractors, accidents disguised by land. Dad was obsessive but not superstitious. He wouldn't have meant it literally. Still, I couldn't help flipping back through the entries, tracing how the handwriting shook more each year, as though he were trying to stop himself from writing that word. By noon, old Tom rolled up the drive in his pickup. Same truck he'd driven when I was a kid, just more rust than paint now. He carried a tin of his wife's cornbread and eyes that wouldn't land on mine. "Your daddy feed the field right to the end?" he asked. I frowned. "I didn't come to feed anything. I'm here to sell." He spat into the dust. "Maybe you think that, but this soil don't like being sold. Every Cooper that's walked away, the land's taken back." I told him to drop the ghost stories, but he just nodded toward the rows of hay listening behind me and said softly, "Ask him yourself. They remember names." When his truck left, the sound hung around like thunder still building somewhere unseen. That evening, I walked out past the barn. The smell changed quickly, from dry dust near the porch to damp rot by the fence. A scent like open wounds left in sun. Fireflies gathered in swirls along invisible lines, marking boundaries I didn't understand. As I crossed into the field, wind flattened the stalks ahead of me, parting a path. Maybe coincidence. Maybe the earth exhaled at the right moment. Halfway through, I found the scarecrow. Dad used to change its shirt every harvest. This one wore his flannel. The orange and cream squares faded to rust. Rain had erased the mouth stitched in its burlap head. For eyes, it had pennies blackened with age. Around its waist, someone had tied a string with old photographs threaded through like charms. The family in front of the house, Mom holding me as a baby. Then a later one I couldn't remember ever taking. Me about 17, staring at the field, while she stood behind me, a blur of motion, hand on my shoulder. In pen on the back, someone had written, "She wanted to grow here." I didn't sleep that night either. The next few days blurred together. The wind never stopped. I started hearing it through the pipes, through the fridge, even through the old radio that hadn't worked since dial stations went digital. When I turned the knob all the way down, the static still whispered, the same soft syllables trailing into breath. On the fourth night, a storm turned the sky black-green. Lightning stuttered across the ridge, and the corn seemed taller every flash, as if it grew upward each time the light touched it. Then a noise kicked through the thunder, low and wet, the sound of soil opening, not cracking, opening. I looked through the window above the sink. Beyond the swinging yard light, the scarecrow had changed places again. It now stood beside the well near the barn. And someone, or something, was kneeling next to it, hands sunk wrist-deep in earth. I called out. The figure jerked too fast and disappeared. The light swung back and forth until its chain snapped and darkness folded over everything. A few hours later, when the storm cleared, I went out with a flashlight. Mud swallowed each step. The well cap had been pried open, fresh soil piled beside it as though someone had been digging upward, not down. Inside, the stones glistened wet, but there was no water, only roots running spiral deep, and they hummed, a dull drone almost too low to hear, yet heavy enough to press against the ribs. That's when the voice came, close as my own breath. "She's waiting." The beam flicked out. Something cold brushed my ankle from below. By the time I stumbled back to the house, my boots were coated in mud that steamed in the cool air.
I showered, scrubbed until the water ran clear, but the smell stayed, a mixture of salt and rot. When I pulled on a clean shirt, I found grains of dirt inside the collar, shaped almost like letters. I thought they spelled my name, but that might have been fatigue twisting patterns into meaning. At dawn, I stood on the porch with coffee, convincing myself of sanity. Then the wind changed. It carried birdsong and the faint rustle of moving stalks. Out in the rows, something was walking, tall, sure, keeping even pace like an animal too upright for its own legs. For a moment, I saw an outline, woman-shaped, head swinging with the rhythm of the field. Then the sun burned through fog, and she was gone. By midday, the heat bore down until even the insects quit. I tried mowing the grass just to drown the silence, but whenever I pushed the machine toward the rows, the motor coughed and died. The moment I turned back toward the house, it started first pull. After 3 tries, I gave up. I kept telling myself there was a logical explanation: magnetized soil, a drop in barometric pressure, the ghosts of gasoline fumes. Things I could list, name, pin down. If I could name it, I could keep it small. But the air had begun to feel thick, weighted, as if the field was pressing up against every window, testing the house like a tongue against a tooth. Inside, I opened the old radio again, pried off the back, wanting to prove that the faint whispers were nothing more than loose wiring. A single kernel of corn rolled out from the speaker grill. Just one, hard as stone, warm to the touch. I dropped it in the sink and heard it pop quietly, as if from heat. When I turned away, it had split open. Inside wasn't starch at all. Something dark pulsed once, then stopped. That evening, Tom's truck reappeared at the end of the drive. He didn't come closer than the fence. He just leaned out the window and shouted, "You burn it yet?" "Burn what?" The scarecrow, the thing holding her place. I already tried. Fire went out. He stared toward the horizon, swallowed hard. Then you got till the moon turns. After that, nothing in scripture nor gasoline can help. I told him to speak plainly, but he pressed his cap down over his face and drove off. His taillights vanished behind the rows like sparks snuffed under soil. After he left, I walked out again. Why, I couldn't say. Some part of me needed to look straight at it before night fell. The field waited, shimmering with that false golden calm fields get right before storms. The scarecrow stood by the well still, hat sagging, sleeves lifting slightly with each inhale of wind. I tried again to set fire to it. This time the flannel burned quickly, bright blue where the lighter fluid took hold, the air filling with sharp heat. The rope around its waist cracked, and the stuffed straw fell forward. The second it hit earth, flame snuffed itself out, sucked downward like a match dunked in water. The ground at its feet moved, slow, circular, like something beneath was turning over. Then came the smell. Sweet decay, with an edge of iron. A hand, human, gray as wet ash, pushed through the dirt, then another. They groped through mud, fingers trembling toward light. I staggered back until my heel hit the well stones. Then I heard it, clean and close, as a whisper at my ear. "Sam, you brought me home." The earth folded open. For one endless moment, her face, my mother's, rose into view, flesh laced with roots, eyes filmed milk white. She reached out, soil sliding from her wrist like sand through an hourglass. And then she was gone again, drawn downward as the ground sealed over. The whisper stilled. So did the wind. Only my own breath kept sound. When I came back to myself, I was on the porch, dawn leaking gray across the sky. My hands were coated in dirt. I'd left footprints of mud from doorstep to sink, but the rest of the house looked scrubbed clean, too clean, as if every speck of dust had been drawn into the walls. The air smelled faintly sweet, pleasant, like the first cut of hay. Out across the hollows, the field waved, gentle under a soft breeze. Birds sang. The silence that had pressed against the house for days lifted, replaced by that mild, ordinary summer sound you could almost trust. For the first time since coming home, I felt something like peace.
By afternoon, Tom's truck pulled up again. He found me sitting on the steps with coffee. He studied my face a long time before saying anything. "You look just like your daddy the year he stopped fighting it." I smiled without meaning to. "The field's settled now, Tom. He doesn't want anything." He nodded slowly, gaze moving past me to the acres shimmering gold against the sun. "That's what they all say, son. For a while." He left without another word. Tires threw dust that sparkled in the light before falling back like powder. That night, the wind returned, softer, steady, rhythmic, almost like breathing, almost like my own. I opened the window instead of closing it. The hum spread through the house, patient and low, matching my pulse. I stepped outside barefoot. The soil felt warm, alive, welcoming. Moonlight lay across the rows like silver water. More fireflies than I'd ever seen floated above the stalks, marking out curves and circles that could have been writing if a person stared long enough. At the edge of vision, near the center of the field, someone stood, a figure, still and upright. The outline shimmered faintly, as if every stalk leaned toward it, feeding it light. When I blinked, it vanished, leaving only ripples in the grain. But I knew the figure's shape. It was me. I don't remember walking back inside, or the hours between that moment and sunrise.
I only remember waking to find the world brighter than it should be. The crops glowed with morning color so vivid it hurt the eyes. Even the wood of the porch seemed to pulse faintly, expanding with each bird call. The ledger lay open on the table. Our family entries ended where I'd left off. But a new line had appeared beneath my father's last note in that same sharp, cramped handwriting. 2023, Samuel Cooper. Accepted. The ink was still damp. By the time the next passerby came through Marlowe County, some surveyor, they said, the Cooper place looked better than it had in decades. Fences fixed, house newly painted, field thick with golden corn. The man who greeted them on the porch wore an easy smile, an orange flannel, said his name was Sam. A generous sort, quick handshake, eyes a little too pale. He promised to sell a share of the harvest, said the land never failed him, and when the wind passed through the rows, bending every stalk to the same invisible rhythm, he tilted his head slightly, listening. If you stood close enough, you might have heard what he heard. A whisper, traveling through the dry rustle of leaves, repeating two things again and again: his name and the sound of breathing. And when dusk comes to Marlowe County, when the horizon behind those endless fields darkens copper and the air stands still, you can still hear the faint rustle beneath your feet, soft as someone turning over in their sleep, because the field is dreaming, and the dream it whispers is the oldest one we have. Everything we plant finds its way home.
The new life fit easily, like pulling on an old jacket. Every morning I rose at 5, coffee black, stepped out into the cool hush and listened. The field always greeted me first, a light rustle, a rhythm matching my breath. I started hearing patterns in it, the kind of murmured intervals farmers once used to pace their scything. Ha, ha, slash, ha, ha, slash. Except there were no blades here and nothing to cut. The ground did its own work. By the second week, I noticed it no longer needed weeding. Any stump I dug up by breakfast had already resealed by dusk, the soil drawn smooth again. Rain came exactly when it should, never more, never less. And every morning, new finches perched on the fence, watching quietly, as if counting. People from town began stopping by. Small talk, casual. "You're keeping her up nice this year." Her. They called the field her. Tom, the clerk at the gas station, a woman from church. They all said it the same way, polite, reverent, afraid. I started doing it too. Couldn't help it. "She's looking good," I'd say, and they'd nod like I'd finally remembered my lines. At night, I still dreamed of the roots, thick and veined, coiling through dark water. Somewhere in that submerged light, something pulsed faintly, and the sound hit the bones behind my ears. Not speech yet, but close, like the pause between words forming. I'd wake with the taste of salt and copper in my mouth and find a few grains of soil under my fingernails. I stopped fighting it. The effort felt dishonest now, as if resisting her attention were a kind of betrayal. So I leaned into it, tilled less, walked the acres barefoot until I could feel warmth rising from underweight furrows. She, no more of an it, always she, would breathe back up through my arches, slow and sure, as though her lungs were opening below. The first time I heard her voice clear, it sounded like my mother's laughter when I was a child. Before the sickness, before the drought,
"The field remembers kindness," she said. And just like that, I wasn't afraid anymore. The next Sunday, church bells rang, but the pews stayed thin. Folks claimed new weeds were working through their soil, that their stock weren't eating. "Strange blight," the preacher told me, fanning himself, "but your ground's staying green as ever." I told him it all depended on gratitude. He blinked. "Gratitude? For what she gives, you have to show her you're thankful. Otherwise, she takes her own thanks." He chuckled nervously, the sound small against the open sky. "You sound like your daddy." That night, lightning crawled through clouds, but never struck. Half the county lost power. My lights burned steady. Through the window, I could see the distant patchwork of dark farms surrounding our golden island. On the horizon, tiny sparks winked and vanished as barns caught fire one by one. From far away, it looked like blinking eyes closing. When the wind reached my porch, it carried smoke mixed with a question. "Will you feed them too?" I answered without speaking, just pressed my palm flat to the soil beside the steps until I felt her answer, a slow, warm pulse rising through the boards. A month later, September's harvest moon lifted blood orange above the valley. Reporters came to photograph the miracle crop, the only farm thriving after the summer's blight. I told them the soil had memory. They scrawled it as poetry for the lifestyle section. None of them noticed that between every 2 rows, one swale of dirt stayed freshly turned, never sprouting. She needed those bare channels to breathe. When they left, I walked their tire tracks out of the field with a rake. Can't have strangers disturbing the rhythm. The voices came sharper now, shaped into sentences by the wind. "We keep you, you keep us." Sometimes they sounded human, sometimes like cornstalks rubbing together. I learned to speak back softly, only between heartbeats. If I tried when my pulse rose, she'd reply too fast to follow and leave me dizzy. One evening, I stood at the kitchen sink, and the window fogged over though there was no steam. On the glass appeared 5 fingerprints, perfectly spaced, pressing from the outside. Then another 5 beneath, hands rising up the pane like climbing ivy, streaking mud in half circles before fading. I realized it wasn't a warning, it was praise. Everything in her world rises, from seed, from bone, from whatever we mistake for death.
By October, the townspeople stopped visiting altogether. They watched from the highway, whispering when I drove in for supplies. I saw notices for prayer meetings pinned to lampposts, the letters "Protect us from the soil" scrawled in marker. They meant well. Fear's a form of courtesy out here. I kept my errands short. Back on my land, the air always settled easy again. The horizon didn't end in fences anymore, but in misty roll, like the field had been widening inch by inch, reclaiming. At night, I could swear I heard her hum from miles off, a lullaby built from owls, crickets, distant train horns. Whole counties joined the chorus. One dawn, about a year to the day since I burned the scarecrow, she woke me outright. Not a whisper, not a dream. The sound came through the floorboards, through the bed frame, through my bones. "It's harvest day," she said. When I opened the door, the field blazed white gold. Every ear of corn split neatly, kernels glistening wet as pearls. Steam curled upward, soft and fragrant. The air felt thick as milk, shimmering with heat that wasn't heat at all, but joy. I walked out into it. The ground didn't press against my feet anymore. It gave way, welcoming. Beneath the topsoil waited roots, twining like fingers, adjusting around my ankles, lifting slightly, as though to measure. I thought of Mom and Dad, of all those names scribbled in red ink. How small the word sacrifice looks beside what the land gives back. "Will it hurt?" I asked. "No," came her voice from everywhere. "You'll grow." And with that, the earth opened gently, like lips parting to speak. No one saw me after that. Not really. They say a man still lives on the Cooper place, tends the house, sells corn by the roadside stand. He looks younger than he should. Eyes clear gray, skin warm and pale like new husk. Sometimes he hums with the wind, sometimes stands motionless for hours facing the rows. When strangers pass, he raises his hand in greeting. Dust swirls behind him, and the stalks bow as if the whole field breathes through him. And if a traveler stops to buy a few ears, he'll hand them over, smile, and say, "Careful where you plant the kernels. The soil remembers kindness." They don't understand the warning until they reach town, peel back the husks, and find that each cob bears a faint pattern, fine as handwriting, spelling out 2 words again and again in tiny brown scars. My name. My name. My name. Epilogue. When the wind sweeps through Marlowe County now, it no longer sounds restless. It sounds content, like something vast asleep under the rose, dreaming of the next voice to learn. And on quiet nights, if you stand at the edge of those perfect golden acres and listen hard enough between heartbeats, you might still hear a man's voice decaying into the rhythm of leaves, first calling for his mother, then whispering the secret he finally understood. Everything the land takes, it keeps. Everything it keeps, it makes sing.
I hadn't thought about Bell Hollow in 15 years, not since the choir stopped singing. Back then, our church stood bright as a penny, every Sunday full of hymns that drifted past the hills and echoed from one ridge to another. Now the roof had caved in, and what hymns remained came from the trees, their bark vibrating on still nights long after midnight. When Aunt May died, I had to go back. She'd been the last Cooper left in the hollow, no relation to the ones from Marlowe County, though folks mixed up their stories. My inheritance was a cabin, 3 acres, and whatever the hollow hadn't already swallowed. The sheriff showed me the turnoff road, all rock slide and kudzu. "Clear outer things before dark," he said. "Bell Hollow does better without company." The valley floor was cooler than it should have been for July. Fog hugged the reedy creek like wet silk. My headlights picked out old mailboxes leaning at odd angles, names long faded. The forest pressed in heavy, as if listening. When I reached Aunt May's cabin, every window stood open. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and candle wax, exactly the way it had when I was a kid. On the table lay her Bible, spine split, and beside it a brass handbell polished bright. She used to ring it before supper. To remind them we still hear 'em, she'd say. I never knew who them was. That first night I dreamed of singing, high, wordless voices drifting from the creek bed. When I woke, the bell from the table rested by my pillow. I hadn't moved it. Outside, the meadow shimmered silver under the moon. No breeze, all the trees still, yet the tall grass rippled in steady rhythm, wave after wave moving from east to west. The motion stopped when I stepped onto the porch. I chalked it up to grief and wind that didn't quite reach the surface of the valley.
The next morning, I walked down to the old church, its foundation crouched behind the cottonwoods, just a few stone steps and remnants of the whitewashed sign, Bell Hollow Primitive Baptist. Inside, if you could call it inside, vines laced through pew frames, bird nests crowded the pulpit, but the floorboards held one perfect square of clean dust, unmarked by time. In the center of that square sat another brass handbell, small twin to Aunt May's. When I touched it, the air vibrated. I swear the wood beneath my boots thrummed like a note on a cello string. I dropped it. The sound died instantly, leaving a silence heavy enough to make my teeth ache. I found May's old cassette deck back at the cabin. Inside it, a tape labeled Hollow Voices, 1993. Her handwriting slanted, neat and careful. I pressed play. At first, only the hiss of static, faint bursts of wind and insects. Then came a tone, pure, clear, not like any human throat could hold. One note repeated every few seconds, high and perfect, followed by a pause that felt like breathing. Beneath it, May's voice whispered, "They're learning to keep time." Then laughter, not hers, not quite human either, like wind through glass bottles. The tape cut off there. That evening, a real wind moved down the valley, and the trees began to hum in the same key as that tone on the tape. On the second day, a man drove up in a rusty truck. He introduced himself as Walker, neighbor from 3 miles downslope, caretaker of the watershed. "You her kin?" he said, rather than asked. "I'm clearing the place. She always said the song would fall to family." He chewed on a matchstick, watching the trees sway. "When they start tuning the air, best not answer back." I frowned. "You mean the cicadas?" He shook his head. "Ain't insects make a chord like that." Before he left, he pointed to the bell on my porch. "If they get close, ring that once. Not twice, once, to remind them you're still flesh." He tossed the match into the dust and was gone before it hit ground. 2 nights later, I awoke to another sound. Singing, yes, but shaped like breath passing through pipes. Children's voices, dozens of them, turning, slow and deliberate, along a scale I didn't recognize. Each note seemed to come from a different direction. The creek, the trees, the very soil. I stood barefoot at the window. Mist had filled the field, thick and white, rolling as though something moved beneath it. Figures, small, pale as smoke, walked between the cottonwoods, each holding their hands together at the chest the way choir kids used to during hymns. Their mouths opened and closed, but whatever music reached me didn't line up with their rhythm. They sang one thing, the sound arrived another, delayed by half a breath, like echo trying to lead its source. The brass bell on the table vibrated without being touched. The handle rang against the wood exactly once. The children stopped singing. Every head turned toward my window in perfect unison. That's when I noticed none of them had eyes, only the sunken space where a bell shape might fit. A gust rolled through and the figures shimmered away, leaving only fog and the smell of iron. When dawn broke, the field was bare again, but dozens of small impressions dotted the dirt, circular, as if someone had pressed handbells into the soil all night long.
The next morning, I found May's journals stacked in the wood box under the stove. Damp pages, but the ink still legible. The first entries were ordinary. Planting dates, water levels, gossip about town. Then, halfway through the last book, her tone changed. September 9th. The sound's back. Not in the air this time, in the ground. I tried to record, but the mic only catches silence. Walker says it's the shale pockets releasing gas, but I can tell when breath is moving through song. September 14th. They practice every night. The older ones guide the rest. I never raised children, but maybe this is how it would have felt, teaching them names, watching them remember who they were. October 3rd. When they hum together, the fog glows like lantern glass. The preacher said souls hum like that when grace brushes them. The final page held a single line, written larger than the rest. If I keep ringing, they'll think I'm theirs. I ran my thumb over the indentation where she'd pressed the pen until it tore the paper. Outside, cloud banks rolled in from the west, though the forecast promised clear skies. By dusk, the humidity broke. Wind slithered through the hollow, gentle but constant, the same pitch as the note from May's tape. I tried drowning it out, turned on the radio, the kettle, even the old generator, but no matter what noise I made, it found a way back into hearing distance, folding beneath everything else. Around 9, lightning crawled along the ridge without thunder. For a heartbeat, the whole valley glowed silver and still. Then the sound hit. Not a crack, but a deep, human-like inhale that seemed to come from below. The cabin walls began to vibrate. Tiny flecks of dust rose and hovered in the air. On the table, both bells shivered in sympathy, their handles striking softly, almost politely. Then came the humming of many throats, layered, rising. It built until the walls flexed like an accordion reed, until the sound became pressure. Instinct made me grab the nearest bell and ring it once. The tone cut through everything, high and pure. Silence fell, clean and sudden. Even the trees quit moving. Then in that vacuum, a whisper, "She heard you." Walker returned the next afternoon carrying a sock of limestone. He said, "I heard the ringing. You shouldn't have answered." I told him about the voices, the way they rose from the earth. He nodded, jaw tight. May told me it started with the mine. They hit a vein of gas down past the old church site in 23 and lost half a crew. Folks claimed later that at night you could hear the ones that didn't come up, singing. Bell Hollow took their breath and never stopped exhaling. He poured limestone dust across the doorway, across windowsills. "Stops vibration," he muttered. "At least it used to." Before he left, he pressed a small river stone into my hand. Someone had carved tiny concentric rings on its surface. "Keep this nearby. They can't stand still water." That evening, the air went utterly still. No insects, no creek, no wind. And then, faint and far, a low hum began. Single voice, then 2, then dozens. The sound wasn't above ground this time. It was beneath me, under the floors, beating up through the soles of my feet. I stepped outside, clutching the carved stone so hard the edges cut my palm. The night pressed close, thick as syrup. A silver mist rolled up from the creek bed, carrying specks of light that hung level with my chest like floating candles. Shapes moved inside that glow, rows upon rows of translucent faces tilted upward, mouths open in perfect O's. The old church bell that hadn't rung in 20 decades began to chime slowly, without wind, the same note over and over, keeping the rhythm like a metronome. Their song thickened until the sound wasn't sound, but weight. My ribs vibrated, windows cracked along their frames. I felt blood rise in my throat and realized the pressure wanted me to sing with them, not out loud, but through breath, through heartbeat. I stumbled backward, hit the porch, still clutching the bell. Remembering Walker's advice, I rang it once. The tone cut through the valley like a blade of ice.
Every glowing figure froze mid-note. The light snapped off, swallowed in an instant. Mist dropped, and then the creek screamed. Not metaphor, it screamed, a human cry forced through water. The sound faded slowly downriver until only frogs remained. When I looked at the bell in my hand, tiny hairline cracks split the brass all around the rim. I must have passed out on the porch, because the next thing I remember was sunlight and birds. The air all around the cabin had lain flat in perfect concentric rings outward 50 yards. Walker's truck was gone, his limestone lines scattered. Down by the church, smoke curled lazily from the ground. The ruins themselves had collapsed overnight, only the steeple skeleton standing, bell gone. Near the foundation, I found footprints, small, barefoot, hundreds of them, leading into the earth where the church floor used to be. The dirt there pulsed faintly, pushing up and down like breath. When I reached home later, the cracked bell was gone. In its place, on the table, lay May's notebook, closed tight and perfectly clean, as if never used. I opened it. Only one fresh line waited inside. They learned harmony. 2 months later, highway crews clearing debris from the old road reported hearing singing in the wind tunnels. They said it was like a women's choir, soft and far, humming scales. One man quit the same week, said the pattern kept matching his own breathing, each inhale perfectly countering his exhale, as if something beneath the asphalt was keeping time with him. Now, when storms roll through western Kentucky, people in nearby towns swear they hear bells ringing miles apart but perfectly synchronized. Locals call it the hollow practice. Only one cabin remains usable there, paint fresh, roof new. Visitors say a single brass bell hangs above its door, shining like it's been polished from the inside out. If you stand near it too long, the air around you begins to hum in the precise key of whatever your last heartbeat happened to be.
The first thing you notice about Cooley County is how the wind never stops. It blows east to west all year, wearing the fences silver and bending the prairie grass until it lies flat like fur. I'd driven 8 hours out from Wichita to photograph abandoned grain elevators, part of a freelance piece on America's forgotten harvest towns. The magazine wanted nostalgia with texture, peeling paint, empty diners, a hint of road trip melancholy. By the time the sun began to sink over the plains, I was deep into the back roads. GPS lost signal somewhere south of Silo 9, and the horizon folded itself into endless bronze fields. Every turn looked the same. Barbed wire, battered mailboxes, a single tin roof miles off that might have been moving. Then I saw the sign, Silo Road. Someone had spray painted over the mileage numbers. Beneath it, wooden arrows pointed nowhere at all. Half a mile down, a shape rose from the wheat, a massive cement grain tower, gray and skeletal, surrounded by wind turbines, frozen in still air. The tower's top bore one word spelled in faded letters, cooperative. I parked the truck and stepped out into silence. No wind, for the first time all day, only the faint hum of metal cooling in the evening. At the base of the silo sat a rust-red house, windows intact, garden wild with thistles. When I swung my camera up for a shot, I caught movement. A man standing in the doorway, perfectly still, watching. He was thin, sunburned, somewhere past 60. "You're on co-op land," he called. His voice had the dry rasp of someone who hadn't spoken much. I apologized, explained the freelance project. He nodded, but the expression didn't change. "Photographs steal the stillness. We need that here." I thought he meant I was trespassing. "I'll be quick." "You'll stay till the wind changes," he said, then turned into the house. Half warning, half invitation, I should have left right then.
Instead, curiosity, the same thing that gets city boys into every story like this, pushed me closer. The tower door hung open. Inside smelled of dust and oil, but underneath that drifted another scent, sweet, rotten, like fermenting fruit. Hundreds of pigeon bones carpeted the floor. My flashlight beam landed on machinery, augers, pulley belts, an old mechanical scale that still ticked every few seconds, though it wasn't plugged in. The walls, they weren't concrete anymore. They were lined with a skin of white husks, corn husks pasted together into long, curling sheets, pressed so tight they formed patterns that almost looked deliberate. Spirals, eyes, a handprint taller than me. When the wind finally returned, it entered through the broken vents and made the entire cylinder hum. A low note, steady and human in pitch. My ribs vibrated with it. Then, buried below the hum, a second tone rose. Higher, thinner, like someone singing from inside the grain. I stumbled back into the open air. The wind outside had shifted east, the opposite of its usual path. Fields bowed toward the silo instead of away. From the red house, the keeper called, "She's waken early this year." He invited me to dinner, maybe out of politeness, maybe to keep me from running. Inside, everything smelt faintly of iodine and sugar. We ate canned beans and hush puppies fried black. He said his name was Danner, last in the line of silo watchmen. He said it's not grain in there anymore. It's what grain remembers. I asked what that meant. He stared at the window where the last light bled orange into the wheat. Every harvest leaves a sound. We keep it sleeping till next sowing. Otherwise, it keeps growing on its own. He poured me coffee thick as syrup. "You hear her singing yet?" I lied and said no. His smile was small and pitying. Everyone lies the first night. Sleep found me in the truck, windows fogged from inside. Near midnight, the temperature dropped fast. Frost creeped up the windshield in long, feathered lines that resembled stalks bending in wind. Then the singing began. Low, feminine, not from far away, but from every direction at once. The sound wove itself through the turbines until each blade caught part of the tune. It wasn't a song made of words. It was breath widening and tightening over and over, shaping vowels that never ended. Across the field, the silo doors glowed faintly, pulsing to the rhythm. The turbines started to turn, though there was no wind. The air thickened, vibrating like struck glass. Each turbine's rotation matched the rise of the melody. Some part of me registered the danger, irrational city man's warning klaxon going off, but the rest, deeper, wanted to walk into that sound. When the first note pierced high enough to prickle my teeth, the floodlights on the silo snapped on. White dust swirled out through vents like breath, and then the wind died again. Everything stopped. Just before the silence crushed itself shut, I heard Danner shout from the house, "Get down! She's listening for names!"
At daylight, Danner hammered on the side of my truck until I woke. His clothes smelled of smoke and fertilizer. He didn't ask if I'd heard the singing. He could tell. Everyone who'd heard it looked the same, he said. Eyes a little too wide, heartbeat one beat late. "You can't stay past sundown," he told me. "It learns quick." He brewed coffee on a rusted camping stove, black and bitter as ash. Over the rim of the cup, he watched the horizon twitch with dust devils. "Co-op built that tower in '29, first concrete silo in the county. They said its shape cut the wind just right to keep grain from molding. Only thing is, wind doesn't like being cut. Once the tunnel's cured, it never flowed right again." He pointed across the fields. "When the wind gets trapped, it calls itself back. Over time, that call grows an echo. What you heard last night, that's the echo talking to itself." He looked suddenly older. "The land's been answering for near a century." I asked what kept him here. He tapped his chest. "Somebody has to keep count of the echoes." After breakfast, he let me see the silo's upper deck. We climbed the narrow staircase, spiraling up inside the concrete shell. Every 50 feet, the hum changed pitch. I could feel each note in my teeth. At the top, daylight filtered through a hatch. Below us, the grain mound shimmered, wrong-colored, too pale, surface quivering like breath under gauze. Danner set down a small mechanical counter, a remnant from Depression-era way stations. Each tick clicked to the rhythm of the pulse from below. "How much is down there?" I asked. He shook his head. "It's not grain anymore. Don't feed her. She feeds herself on what the wind leaves behind." The mound shifted slightly, a slow swell. "See how she mimics speech?" He encouraged me to listen. The hum rose and fell, unmistakably arranging into the pattern of words, the first half of my name. I stepped back fast. The metal catwalk groaned. "That's how she starts. Finds a tone that fits your bones." I wanted proof, anything to show this wasn't just Danner's folklore or my exhaustion. I lifted my camera, focused to the haze onto the vibrating grain. The shutter clicked once. The flash fizzled yellow. When I checked the digital preview, the image showed the same circular mound, but smoothed perfect, like skin stretched too tight. In the very center, a faint indentation. A face half submerged, eyes closed. Mine. I lowered the camera, stomach dropping. The mound twitched as if stirred. A gust shrieked through the vent, slamming the hatch. Danner swore, grabbed my arm. "She sees herself now. Run!" We thundered down the spiral stairs, the light behind us turning ochre, then red. Dust poured from the seams, thick as fog. By the time we reached ground level, my ears rang with 100 overlapping whispers. Outside, the sky had gone still, but wrong. Colors too saturated, clouds frozen like brushstrokes. The turbine stood motionless, yet air dragged against my face like moving water. Danner shoved me toward my pickup. "Point south, don't look back till the wind feels honest again." I drove as fast as to make the truck fishtail, grain dust swirling in the mirrors. For 20 miles, the road seemed to loop, no landmarks, just repeating fences and the same jackrabbit crossing at the same spot. When I finally hit a paved highway, the wind slammed into me head-on from east to west, back to normal. I didn't stop until Wichita. In the motel parking lot, I checked the photos. Dozens I didn't remember taking filled the memory card. Every image the same. The silo under shifting light, each frame showing its door slightly more open and a thread of white dust curling toward the lens. In the last photo, the thread reached the camera, a blurred handprint smearing across glass. I deleted everything, yet the hum refused to leave my ears. At 2 a.m., the ceiling vent rattled once, sighed, fell silent. Then came the voice, barely a vibration in the air. "Wind needs shapes. Come back." I left before sunrise, figuring the mind invents patterns under stress. But when I hit the interstate, every windmill along the ridge turned at exactly the same angle, blades facing north toward me, as though tracking. 3 months later, the magazine sent me proofs for the article. My heart jerked when I saw the title they'd chosen without consulting me. "The Cooperative, Where the Wind Sleeps." In the center spread was one of the photos I'd supposedly deleted. The silo under storm light, its vents wide open, something white spiraling outward. The photo credit read simply, "Samuel Danner." I called the editor. She said the submission came directly from the photographer on location. Timestamp perfectly recent. She said you showed him how to upload, she added cheerfully. I hung up. The air conditioner hummed a single low note. The blinds began to sway, though the windows were sealed. Every spring now, the weather bulletins list Cooley County like a caution. Instruments there pick up wind that moves both directions at once, dozens of miles per hour converging instead of passing. The reports say, it sings. Highway crews who plow the silo road claim they see a new structure beside the old tower, a smaller one, identical,
Gray concrete still curing in the light, door chained shut. Fresh tire prints curve away south to the highway. They never find Danner's truck, but each year round planting time, travelers hear his voice ride the crosswind, friendly drawl bending around a single phrase. Wind's awake early this year. Then the breeze changes direction for just a heartbeat, whispers one word, or name, depending on who's listening, and the turbines across the county all turn at once.
When the mining company shut down last winter, I took whatever work came my way, mapping rural cell tower sites. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid in gasoline and quiet. Early October, they sent me to Caldwell Ridge in southern West Virginia, one of those half-tame stretches of Appalachia that never quite joins the century it's living in. The directions were old, hand-drawn coordinates, no GPS signal beyond mile marker 27. They told me to find a spot called Lantern Mile, named, someone said, after an old coal road lit by miners' warning lamps. The locals at the diner laughed when I mentioned it. "Lantern Mile ain't a road," said the waitress with the silver cross on her collar. "What is it then?" She looked at the mountains through the window. "Depends who you ask. Some say it's the light that walks when the shift whistles stop." The gravel trail wound upward until the forest thickened. Every 12 or 13 feet, an old wooden post jutted from the ditch. On top of each post sat a jar, rusted lid, glass blackened from inside, but faintly shining as the dusk fell. They looked like mason jars holding lightning bugs that forgot they died decades ago. Fog came down fast. The air turned metallic, colder than it should have been. When I parked by the old mine office, the pickup radio hissed, though it was turned off. Across the road stood a corrugated metal shack, half folded into earth. A sign above its door read, "Coal, not equal to cost. Coal equals debt." The words shimmered like heat, even in cold light. When I stepped inside for shelter, I found rows of lamps, hundreds of them, miners' headlamps, green glass cracked, each resting neatly upside down. The dirt floor between them was scored with boot prints leading in all directions, some vanishing mid-stride. Then, faint and crisp as a match-struck sound, one of the jars outside flickered. I set up my surveying tripod on what looked like the old rail bed. Fog hid the valley below. The nearest thing like civilization was a whistle echoing from somewhere far downhill. 3 notes rising, 1 falling, the rhythm of a shift change that hadn't happened in half a century. When full night fell, the posts along the road ignited in sequence, jar by jar, a soft sweep of blue flame moving toward me. Each burned for 10 seconds, dimmed, then the light moved to the next jar as if something carried it on invisible shoulders. It crawled slowly up the mile, its approach soundless, except for a faint crunch like coal underfoot. The air smelled of stone dust and rain. My meter began to tick irregularly, picking up bursts of energy stronger than any generator signal. I half laughed, half choked at how easily fear shapes itself to numbers. When the moving glow reached the edge of my sight, I saw it clearly. A narrow shape inside the glass, like a flame turned solid, leaning always forward, head bowed. And behind it, moving in alternating rhythm, came dozens more lights deeper down the grade, a column of them walking uphill without bodies. My camera flashed instinctively. The light stopped mid-stride. Everything went black. In the silence that followed, the forest exhaled, and I heard one word from among the trees. Count.
I must have passed out in the truck because sunrise woke me. The jars looked empty now, normal glass catching dew. I told myself it had been fog glare and exhaustion. Back in town, I found a small museum next to the gas station, a single-room building full of pickaxes and photographs of soot-bright faces. The curator, an old man with eyes clouded blue, asked my business. When I mentioned the lights, he drew a long breath. They never did quit their shift. Folks tried sealing the tunnels, but the company paid them in silence instead. Lantern Mile was where the last 20 men came out or didn't. He lifted a jar from a shelf, same kind as the ones I'd seen. Inside lay a layer of black dust. Every year, someone from your line shows up, always about harvest time. You kin to the Strauds? The name stung familiarity. My grandmother had been a Straud before she married. Then they know you, he said quietly. That evening, curiosity beat sense again. I drove back up before dark. The fog waited already like a patient animal. Near the crest stood a collapsed drift, timbers rotted, air spilling out of it cold as well water. On a beam beside it hung a brass tag stamped with a number, 037. I'd seen that number before, engraved on the tripod the company issued me. The ground underfoot trembled faintly. My flashlight beam wavered across the boards and caught a helmet nestled within. The lamp still glowed, faint and steady. Against reason, I lifted the helmet. Under it lay a skull, still wearing the company's badge. The badge inscription had corroded until only the word "Count" remained legible. Behind me came footsteps, grinding gravel. Not light like animals, but human. Many boots. I turned, the fog swallowed everything. Then one by one, the jars along the mile winked a light again, beginning at the foot of the hill, moving toward me, this time faster. Each jar's glow held a deeper color, red instead of blue, like coal catching oxygen. The nearest light stopped beside me. Inside it, a silhouette shaped like a human hand pressed against glass from the inside, as if asking release. The jar vibrated, and cracks spidered outward. The voice returned, closer, full of dust. Count with us.
I ran until the fog thinned. The pickup's headlights clawed through the dark like underwater lamps. When I finally reached clear air and looked back, all the jar lights had gone out together, their afterglow still etched behind my eyes. Back at the motel, I couldn't sleep. The front desk clerk stared when I mentioned Lantern Mile. She said only one sentence before turning away. The company kept a ledger. They said it balanced when the lights stopped walking. I found that ledger the next morning. The museum man let me thumb through its brittle pages. Rows of numbers and names filled the columns, each record stamped "Paid in Full." At the bottom ran a list of surnames identical to those on the mine memorial cross. The final entry, written decades newer, read, Shift 037, Stroud, unearthed through relative entry. A chill moved through me, as if the page itself had breathed. I traced the pen stroke. Fresh ink, not the rust brown of the older accounts. See, the old man said quietly, they keep accounts long after the books close. Weather closed in again that afternoon. Barometer dropped like a stone. I told myself I would drive north, forget the assignment, let someone else take the readings. But miles down the valley, the wind began to whistle through the truck vents. 3 short, 1 long.
exactly like the old shift signal from the tapes they played in the museum exhibit. The whistling stopped the second I passed mile marker 27. The air turned sweet, the way battery acid smells just before eating metal. The radio came alive with a murmur of identical voices overlapping. Count, count, count. I spun the dial. It stayed exactly on that whisper no matter what station I set. Something in me decided that I couldn't leave the numbers unfinished. If the lights marched, maybe all they wanted was someone on the other end of the tally. Every part of sense rebelled, but whatever draws a moth to flame drew me back up that curve of switchbacks until the tires found gravel again. Fog thicker than snow this time, every sound muffled except my footsteps. At first there was nothing. Then the low hum of air resonated through the wooded cut, deep and syncopated, almost a heartbeat. The first jar flared blue ahead, then the next and next, hundreds burning up toward the ridge. Each time a jar flared, another voice joined in, not moaning, not weeping, just breathing in tempo. The air pulsed warmer with each ignition. Between the lights, I caught outlines, figures made from the same slow-turning mist, shoulders sloped under invisible weight, lamps hanging where faces should be. They trudged uphill in pairs, their boots sinking in nothing. When they reached the top near the tunnel mouth, each figure paused, bowed its head, and merged with the dark opening, leaving its jar dim behind. One stopped midway and turned towards me, the glow within its headlamp brightening until I couldn't look straight at it. The outline beckoned once, palm upward, waiting. Every jar around my ankles began to vibrate. Count, said the voices. Many, male, female, somewhere between breath and mining wind. My heart hammered. I started shouting numbers into the fog, any numbers, 1, 2, 3. Each count steadied the lights, kept them pacing slower. When I reached 37, every flame bent forward like grass in wind, then rose again brighter than before. The sound of shovels hit rock somewhere deep below us. For a few seconds, it actually felt like the world exhaled through me, a gust carrying soot and relief. Then all at once, the air went dark. No afterlight, no breath, not even echo. The silence stunned so complete I could hear my pulse settle back to normal. I told myself it was over. It wasn't. I made it as far as the truck. The engine turned, but every dial spun backwards. Odometer, fuel, clock, all unwinding fast towards zero. When it stopped, the radio clicked on again. Count 37. Complete. Balance. Open. The voice was knowing, almost polite. Static swallowed it, then another sentence slid through. One position. Unfilled. Across the windshield, condensation formed a shape, a circle, then a crooked hash mark, a tally mark, then another. By the fourth, the glass shuddered as if a finger dragged from the other side. Somewhere along the ridge, the jars relit, only a few this time, spelling out a crooked line up the hill. The last jar glowed directly opposite my bumper. The road behind had disappeared completely, replaced by black water shining like oil. It dawned on me what the voice meant. They weren't looking for someone to record the numbers. They were filling a vacancy in the count, the last unpaid debt, mined by blood. I backed away from the wheel, breath clouding the cab. The light from the jars pulsed faster now, a rhythm matching my heart, then overtaking it. For a moment, the sound between them turned warm, almost musical. There was comfort in it, the kind you feel kneeling at a grave. I whispered, stupidly, "You're free." The fog outside folded inward, drawing tight around the truck. Through the side glass, I saw my own reflection tilt its head at a different angle and smile. It raised a lantern, the flame blew inside the lens, same as theirs. The window burst outward, shards scattering like ice. Wind roared in, pure and dry and cold enough to gut breath. Somewhere in that gale, a chorus of voices answered one word in rhythm. Counted. Then everything stopped. They found the truck 2 days later, clean and dry, wedged against a fallen oak half a mile down the mountain. No footprints, no camera. Inside, the dashboard clock had reset to 000. On the passenger seat lay a single mason jar, lid sealed tight, light still burning blue, though no fuel sat within. They turned it over to the state lab. The report said electrostatic phenomenon. Case closed. But when the examiner lifted the jar for photographs, the flame pulsed once to each syllable as he introduced himself. He dropped it and refused to handle it again. Every spring, after flood season, locals say new posts appear along that mile. Bare wood at first, then fitted with jars. The lights begin their slow march again from valley to ridge. Blue one year, red the next. Truckers climbing Route 19 hear a faint clinking under the tires, like a convoy of lanterns keeping pace below ground. Older miners claim that if you pull over, kill your engine, and whisper your name, you'll see one extra jar flicker at the end of the line. That's the one that holds your place, just in case. They call it a haunting, but the families of the dead miners word it differently. They say the road is keeping its promise, always counting, never short, always waiting for the wind that will finally let the last light go dark. And on clear nights from the valley, you can see that procession threading down the mountain. 1,000 tiny blue flames, steady, patient, walking uphill forever.